So you most likely were recently made aware about a court case, Sharps versus Becerra, and how the Firearms Policy Coalition was able to get a win in which the state agreed to reopen the assault weapon registration process. That sounds great, and there's a lot of good information going on around there, but it seems like most people kind of missed the actual meaning of what this is because it's not necessarily what you might want it to be, and we'll talk about more of that in a second. So today we're talking about Sharps versus Becerra. This was a court case that was covering the state's registration process and how much of a failure it was. When it comes to what it was about, prior to 2017, people were able to legally buy and possess what was called a bullet button equipped firearm, meaning a firearm that in order to remove the magazine on an AR or AK style firearm, you needed to press the magazine release with a little tool like the tip of a bullet or a pen to get the magazine to come out. That was compliant under the state's assault weapon ban. The state redefined the definition of a fixed magazine so that the bullet button was no longer encapsulated under that definition. This meant that as of January 1st of 2017, anyone that was in possession of them was in possession of an assault weapon and had a ticking clock of how long they had to actually register it as an assault weapon. The state's website took a while to finally come out after the initial passing of this law, and it was a disaster. I worked in a gun shop during the time that this was going through, and so many people were having issues with the actual registration process. Some people were straight up unable to get it to go through, had failures, couldn't register an account. Every step of the way, people were experiencing issues. This led to many people being forced to either destroy, sell, get rid of, remove from state, or disassemble or modify their firearms that they legally possessed because they did not have a means to register it as an assault weapon. We'll talk about whether or not I think you should choose to register it as an assault weapon later. Now, that became a problem, so the Firearms Policy Coalition created a lawsuit, and they ultimately came to a settlement agreement with the state. The state is now going to allow people who possessed legally in the state of California a bullet button equipped assault weapon prior to January 1st of 2017 to re-register that firearm. And they're also going to potentially have a bigger impact on maybe some other people, but we'll talk about that in a second. Keep in mind, I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. I am not saying that as of right now, I recommend that you go out with your AR-15 and AK style firearms that you possessed prior to 2017, slap a bullet button on it and forget about the whole featureless fixed mag thing. I'm not saying to do that. I think that doing that would cause undue attention to yourself. If you're going to get caught with a firearm at any point, getting caught with an illegal firearm wouldn't be good. So don't get caught with guns. That's my advice. Not legal advice though. So for the people that had a firearm and wanted to register it, does this mean that you can take your bullet button off and then register it as an assault weapon? No. Unfortunately, this is only going to apply to people with those bullet button style assault weapons prior to 2017 in the state of California. They are going to have a process to register it. This might have some sort of impact on the people who have been charged with assault weapon ban charges because maybe they didn't know about the assault weapon ban changes and they still have a bullet button equipped firearm. This most likely will not affect people that had firearms that were completely non-compliant and were just not following the law whatsoever. This might have some effect though for maybe cases like Alan's son. Maybe some of his firearms were legally possessed and had a bullet button still on it. That might be able to be something in the future that we see people's cases affect. Some people might have been in possession of a bullet button equipped firearm, but then the registration period closed and they were no longer able to get it back. Maybe law enforcement seized it for some reason illegally and they weren't able to legally get their firearm back because it was an assault weapon by the time the registration period closed. There's several instances that might be affected like this. If you think you are existing in one of those weird situations, I recommend checking out Firearms Policy Coalition's legal hotline. Their legal hotline is a website that I will link down below where you can say, hey, I've got this going on. They might be able to help you out. They are not free lawyers. They are not just going to help with every single court case ever. But if you have a situation related to the Second Amendment, it is a good way to get in contact with them and kind of get the ball rolling. Maybe they can find someone that can help you out. Then the process of, let's say you do have one of those guns that you might be able to now register once the registration process opens back up. Do I recommend you register your firearms as an assault weapon? Well, we kind of got to look at it from two ways. when you register a firearm, the government now knows that you have it, and that inherently is something that many people, myself included, don't like. I own some firearms legally in the state of California that were never registered, and I don't have to register them because I purchased or acquired those firearms prior to 2014 when long guns were not registered by name at the time of purchase. You still had to do a background check on it, still had to do all that stuff, but I acquired them prior to 2014, meaning that there was no actual record of the make, model, serial number of that gun other than the federal 4473. So for me, I have some firearms that I could maybe find myself in a situation where I could register those as assault weapons. I'm not going to, because for me, the government not knowing about them is massively superior to putting a bullet button on my gun and then having the state know about it. So for me, I find no benefit for those. Some of you might be in a situation where you have a firearm that is registered, meaning you purchased let's say a AR-15 lower or an AR-15 rifle 2014 or later. You then found yourself in a position where, oh, the state system wasn't working and I couldn't register my gun as an assault weapon. I don't recommend you register it as an assault weapon, but you might look at it this way. The state already knows exactly what you have. They know make, model, serial number, caliber, barrel length, all that information. If you bought it as a stripped lower, they know make, model, serial number, and they could pretty easily determine that a Spikes ST15 is an AR lower. So if the government already knows about it, it kind of takes away that anonymity of that firearm. But does that provide value to you? That's for you to decide. Ultimately, I'm not a fan of assault weapon registration because it changes what you can and cannot do with the firearm, where you can and cannot take it, how you have to legally transport it, whether or not you can just leave it laying around your house with your spouse. That stuff changes when it's an assault weapon. So for me, I'm not a fan and I don't recommend it, but this might put you in a situation where you could have some benefit from doing it, or this might benefit you in some way. This is not the same as Miller versus Becerra, which Firearms Policy Coalition is fighting. If you guys want to stay up to date with all that stuff, follow me, drop a like, drop a subscribe. You guys know the drill. Have fun, be safe, stay dangerous. Peace.